The summers here feel like they last an eternity. They swallow the autumns whole. Hot, dry, sensational. The springs have different phases. One set of flowers, then the next, then the next. Nature's theatre in different acts. The winters are cold, that's for sure, but snow is a myth only reserved for the tallest of peaks on the rarest of days. My point is, the British four-season system doesn't work here, and it doesn't work in many parts of the world. There are so many examples of ancient cultures and contemporary cultures that run on season systems that are better suited to their homeland, and the weather patterns and rhythms that control life in that area. I'm talking 6 seasons, 2 seasons, 10 seasons, 24, 72? We'll get to that one later, stay tuned. But for some reason, we try to fit all of these different climate systems into summer, autumn, winter and spring. Today, I'm going to discuss why the First Nations weather systems are far better suited to the sunburnt country, as well as many other examples from throughout the world as well. There's a few different ways that different cultures develop understandings of the weather systems in the area that they live in, such as temperature, which is what the European system is based on, the classic 4-season system. There's also rainfall and wet-dry cycles, so that's often like a wet season and a dry season. Ecological and animal behaviour cycles, as well as cultural and ritual cycles tied to the environment. But before we get into all of those, let's quickly discuss where the European system comes from. Believe it or not, you might not have guessed this from the name, but it comes from the European weather system and a lot of agricultural practices that were tied to these systems. There was also a lot of influences from astrological signs such as equinoxes or solstices, which helped them to sort of track how the climate was progressing. As the British Empire spread across the globe, so did the idea that weather systems should be divided into 4 different categories: summer, autumn, winter and spring. Despite in many cases that being a bad classification for the weather in that area. Okay, so now we know where the British season comes from, which was pretty self-explanatory to be honest. Let's discuss how the First Nations people of Australia divided up their climate seasons. There's plenty of variety across Australia that just reinforces that no singular system can encompass all areas. First of all, we have Birak, which encompasses December and January. This is typically a summery sort of season. It's hot and dry, but the afternoons are often cooled down by winds. And the Noitsia floribunda, which was in my previous video, which I'll link up here, is in flower, as well as Banksias and Zamias. The next season is Bunuroo. Also, I might be mispronouncing some of these, but I'm gonna roll with it anyway. So Bunuroo is February and March, and it is typically the hottest time of the year here. There's very little rain, and the winds from the north and the east are typically really dry, so just a really hot, dry season. Next up is Djeran, which I may be mispronouncing, but that is April and May. During this season, we normally see cooler winds, colder nights, and dewy mornings, although the winds are usually quite mild during this season. And this is what we would typically call, in the British system, autumn. But again, a regular autumn looks like this. There's lots of oranges and browns and everything's falling off the trees, but we don't really get that here in Australia. So I think it's a misrepresentation to even call it autumn. Next up, we have Makaroo, which is in June and July. It's usually cold and rainy, and then we get these strong westerly gales. And this is also when the black swans start molting. So again, it's always linked to the land and often the indicators that we see in the land. Next up is Jilba, I think, which is August and September. This is when it starts warming and the wattles come into bloom, which is the marker of the beginning of a massive blooming event that we get here in the southwest of Australia, where we have lots of wildflowers. And around this time, lots of large birds are nesting and hatching as well. And finally, we have Kambarang, which is October and November. This is characterized by less rain and warmer temperatures and just absolute wildflowers galore. Look everywhere, there's wildflowers, they're absolutely everywhere, and it's sensational. Highly recommend coming and seeing it one day if you haven't. So those are the 6 seasons that the local Noongar people would refer to. And this system makes far more sense for this ecoregion, as it is way more in tune with the cycles of life here. As I mentioned before, autumn doesn't really exist here, at least not in the classical sense. There's no mass shedding of leaves, and the natural colour palette isn't going all orange and brown. Autumn here is essentially like a cooler summer, I would call it. It feels like the summer lasts forever here, as I mentioned earlier. And that's because autumn is essentially just an extension of summer. And that's once again a reiteration that the 4-season system doesn't really work here. Spring also has very distinct phases. When we're talking about plant blooming, we'll see the wattles arrive early, and then we'll see this massive explosion of just flowers everywhere out the wazoo. And then later on we'll get the Zamias, then the Noitsia floribundas and the Banksias. So it's really clear that there's this progression through spring. There's almost different phases of it. Anyway, I think I've gotten my point across here. Different parts of the world have different climates and ecological cycles, and we can't keep trying to shove those diverse cycles into a 4-season system. It just doesn't make sense. Comment below what the seasons are like where you live, and while you're doing that, I'm going to rattle off a few more seasonal systems from throughout the world. On the top end of Oz, there are 2 main seasons, the wet and the dry season. Contrary to what you may think, the wet season up there exists from November to April, which would typically be considered summer, and the dry season occurs from May to October, which is what we would typically consider to be winter. This pattern is common in many parts of the tropical world, but it can sometimes be flipped depending on your geography and the side of the equator that you're on. The Sami people of northern Scandinavia recognise 8 seasons, which I'll put up here. These are mainly tied to reindeer behaviour, as well as snow levels and levels of light. Japan, on the other hand, is an absolute doozy. They have 24 seasons, called Seki, which are tied to solar movements, and 72 Ko, which are based on subtle ecological and natural phenomena. I think it's quite fun going through this and figuring out what Japanese Ko your birthday's in. Hey bro, what's your birth Japanese Ko? Oh, when I was born, the wild geese were returning, bro. Damn, okay, that's sick, bro. Mine is when the thick fog descends. Bro, you might be cursed, bro. To conclude, I do think it is worth knowing what the seasonal, ecological, and natural rhythms are of the place that you live in, as I do believe it is important to at least be somewhat in tune with your natural surroundings. It can also tell you a bit about the history of where you live, and how life has existed there for millennia. And I suppose practically it can be useful to know too. If you live in a place where there is little sunlight for some parts of the year, it could be good to know when you might need to start supplementing vitamin D, or it could be a good excuse to buy that jacket you've been looking at forever as well. Anyway, that's about all I have to say. I hope you have a great day, and please like and subscribe, and comment down below what the natural seasonal fluctuations are like in the place that you live. Cool, thanks. See ya. Man, Loki got this on, but it's so freaking hot.